The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
Chapter 3. Signs of the Times. When you see a south wind blowing, you say, "It will be a hot day," and it turns out that way. You hypocrites, you know how to analyze the appearance of the earth and the sky, but why do you not analyze this present time? Luke chapter 12, verses 55 and 56. This book is not a hair-splitting theological treatise, but a handbook for spiritual survival. Numerous prophecies, including those from Jesus himself, warn that the worldwide spiritual deception just prior to his return will be so seductive that it will mislead, if possible, even the elect. Matthew chapter 24, verse 24. It is only reasonable to assume that those warnings have been given to help us recognize this deception when it comes. The Bible contains many accounts that would lead us to believe that those living upon the earth at the time prophecy is fulfilled are expected to recognize events transpiring in their day as the fulfillment of what the prophets have foretold. For example, referring in his Pentecost sermon to what was happening on that historic day, Peter declared, quote, "This is what was spoken of through the prophet Joel," end of quote, and that's Acts chapter 2, verse 16. The view Jesus had of prophecy was equally practical. He called the two disciples on the road to Emmaus fools for not correlating Old Testament prophecies with events that had happened to him. Luke chapter 24, verses 25 and 26. And in the verses quoted at the beginning of this chapter, he called the Jews of his day hypocrites for not recognizing, on the basis of what their own prophets had said, the signs indicating the unique time in which they lived. Would Jesus also call us fools and hypocrites for not recognizing that we are living in the last days on the basis of the signs we've been given? Could we be deceived if we don't take heed to these warnings? And how can we take heed unless at some point in time we relate what we have been warned about with what is happening in the world? Why does the Bible describe the last days? We cannot escape the fact that the Bible repeatedly and purposefully addresses the subject of the last days and gives numerous signs by which those living at the time are to recognize them. Jesus specified a number of definite signs as though he intended that those living in the last days, though unable to tell the exact day or hour of his coming, Matthew chapter 24, verse 36, would be able to recognize when his second coming was very near. Apparently, it will be extremely important to be able to do so. Referring to the future events he had prophetically described, Jesus said, quote, "Now learn a parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door." Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 and 33. End of quote. There can be no reasonable doubt that the Bible describes the last days with the obvious intent that some generation at some time will be able to recognize that he is near, right at the door. It is our responsibility to determine whether we are that generation or not. We must make this determination not on the basis of new revelation, personal bias, or a desire to be always positive, but by taking Bible prophecies at face value and then examining the evidence. Jesus and his apostles placed great emphasis upon certain signs and warned us not to be asleep and thus fail to recognize them and be caught by surprise. Paul wrote that Christians are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you like a thief. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 4. Some persuasive evidence. Critics argue that some of the signs Jesus gave, wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines, pestilence, have been happening in cycles down through history. Therefore, the mere fact that they are occurring today, even though with greater frequency and intensity, does not in itself prove that we are in the last days. We shall see that it is not necessary to argue that point. There are other very significant signs of the last days for which that argument is meaningless. These generally overlooked signs not only indicate that Christ's return is very near, but carry grave consequences for every person on planet Earth. We ignore them at our peril. There can be no doubt that our generation has seen unique historic developments that are necessary preliminary events leading up to Armageddon. Yet impressive as these indications are, there is much more. For the first time in global history, humanity now has in its hands the terrifying weapons that make it possible to destroy all life on planet Earth. Without such weapons, the biblical prophecies about Christ intervening to save the human race from extinction would be meaningless. We also have, for the first time in history, the mass communication and data processing systems necessary for controlling the entire world economically, politically, and militarily. Thus, for the first time, there exists the means for the practical fulfillment of the prophecies in Revelation 13 concerning the Antichrist control of the world. Moreover, this comes at the precise time that all other necessary ingredients for Armageddon are in place. The first sign Jesus gave, a warning. Clearly, the worn-out objection of skeptics that every generation has thought it was living in the last days on the basis of prophesied signs is absurd. Previous generations may have thought so, but none prior to ours has had the evidence to support that view. No generation from the 70 A.D. exile until 1948 saw Israel return to its homeland, much less the other specific developments mentioned above. Ours is the first generation in history that has seen all of the necessary ingredients come together in its day for fulfilling end times prophecies. Yet there are other prophesied signs that are even more significant. Though extremely important, all of the impressive evidence that we could give or that has been mentioned so far would not tell us how near we may be to the second coming of Jesus Christ without certain further essential confirmation. There are several other signs of a nature different from any we have yet listed that are usually overlooked altogether or given only passing reference by experts in biblical prophecy. Yet these are the most significant signs of all, and they give us good cause for believing that He is near, right at the door. After His disciples asked Jesus, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" the very first thing He said was, "See to it that no one misleads you." Matthew chapter 24, verses 3 and 4. He went on to warn them that the last days immediately prior to His return would be characterized by the greatest deception the world has ever seen. He indicated that this would be religious deception, and that it would involve three specifics: 1, false prophets; 2, false messiahs; and 3, false miracles. Religious deception is the first major sign that Jesus gave to indicate that His second coming is near. It is also the most important. Christ and His apostles emphasized it the most, and with good reason. The consequences of being deceived by false prophets and false messiahs are far worse than being victimized by famine, disease, or war. This is how Jesus summarized His solemn warning. Quote, "For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance." End of quote. Matthew chapter 24, verses 24 and 25. False prophets. Down through history, there have always been a few false prophets. Jesus warned that in the last days there would be many, and that they would deceive many people. For that to come true, there would have to be a worldwide interest and belief in predicting the future. Even 20 years ago, that would have seemed an unlikely possibility for an age of science. Yet this prophecy, made by Christ nearly 2,000 years ago, is being fulfilled in today's space age. Ridiculed as superstition by science not many years ago, prophecy is today being experimented with and verified in laboratory research, where it is now called precognition. That term reflects the materialistic desire to deny anything supernatural and instead to explain the ability to foretell the future as a purely natural power arising out of an allegedly infinite human potential. On the one hand, that approach denies biblical prophecy, which comes as a revelation from God. The door is thus open wide for demonic entities to deceive modern man. Since their very existence is denied, nothing they do would be attributed to them. Moreover, there would be no such thing as false prophecy if precognition is a natural process. Nature is neither false nor true. As a result, the false prophets that Jesus warned about are more free to deceive in the space age than ever before in human history. And the growing eagerness among some Christians to accept new revelation, in spite of its conflict with the Bible, makes the church increasingly vulnerable to false prophets as well. Louisa Rhine, wife of Duke University's J.B. Rhine, the father of American parapsychology, has documented numerous convincing cases of precognition. In their remote viewing experiments, in which psychics were asked to describe distant sites from latitude-longitude coordinates picked up at random by computer, SRI scientists Harold Puthoff and Russell Targ discovered that certain psychics, such as Hella Hamid, could describe the site even before the computer designated it. Former astronaut Edgar Mitchell, sixth man to walk on the moon and commander of Apollo 14, founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences to explore what he calls the most promising frontier of all, the human mind. According to Mitchell, quote, interest in the potential of the mind has grown at a phenomenal rate among scientists in widely differing fields, end of quote. He considers precognition to be an important part of that potential. Mitchell has said, quote, prominent men and women from such unlikely fields as neurophysiology, theoretical physics, and anthropology have been looking seriously into such matters as the always perplexing yet well-documented capabilities of some people for mental activities ranging from telepathy and clairvoyance to precognition and telekinesis. What sort of scientists are daring to pursue these once taboo subject areas? Dr. Herbert Benson, Harvard University, Dr. Elmer Green, Menninger Clinic, Dr. Charles Tart, University of California, Dr. Stanley Gripner, president of the Saybrook Institute, Dr. Dan Coleman, senior editor, Psychology Today, and Dr. Harold Puthoff, Stanford Research Institute, to name just a few. End of quote. The growing acceptance of precognition by science is encouraging the average citizen to put increasing faith in the predictions of a mushrooming pantheon of psychic seers. Not long ago, Edgar Cayce and Jean Dixon were regarded skeptically by most people. Today, there are hundreds of professional psychic prophets with large followings, dozens of varieties of courses for developing psychic mind powers, from alpha-level training to mind dynamics, turn out thousands of amateurs who can do everything Cayce did and more. Graduates of Silver Mind Control, for example, are given their money back if they cannot accurately diagnose persons whose names they have been given, but whom they have never heard of, much less seen or met. Some of the world's top business and political leaders wouldn't make a move without consulting their astrologer or psychic. The ingredients for fulfilling Christ's prophecy that many prophets would deceive many followers are now present as never before in modern history. It is interesting to observe that many of the predictions made by today's modern seers speak of coming disasters similar to those found in Bible prophecies, with an added positive note of hope that sounds suspiciously like certain kinds of positive thinking being taught in the church today. Andrzej Puharich is one of today's most brilliant medical scientists, with about 60 patents to his credit. The following excerpts from a talk to fellow scientists by Puharich give some indication of the type of deception that even the most intelligent will accept, even though it is in clear conflict with the Bible. Quote, I'm a scribe, the information was given to me by some extraterrestrial source. You know that person as Jehovah in the Christian Bible. That name is the title of the leader of a civilization called Huva, 52,000 light ages away. I put on record, in meticulous detail, everything that will happen through the year 2000, including this period of devastation, of cataclysm, of destruction. It's going to be difficult to survive, but I want you to know that those who want to will survive. My colleagues and I saw that you could do healings without medicine. You just had to use your mind properly." End of quote. False messiahs. The Lord's prophecy about many false Christs appearing in the last day is also coming to pass. While there have always been some pretenders, today's world is flooded with those who claim to be Christ. Jim Jones and Charles Manson were two among many. Most of the Eastern gurus who have invaded the West in the last 20 years make the same claim. That a full-page ad could appear in major newspapers around the world announcing, "The Christ is now here," as happened in April 1982, is just one more indication that this is an idea whose time may have come. Those behind it have clearly stated what the ad implied. The Christ is not Jesus. The biblical test of the spirit of Antichrist is, quote, "Who is a liar but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist." End of quote. 1 John chapter 2, verse 22. Within the past 20 years, tens of millions of people in the West have been converted to a basic tenet of Eastern mysticism that we believe will play a key role in the acceptance of the Antichrist. That concept is reincarnation, which is gradually superseding the once dominant Western belief in resurrection. It is almost inevitable that anyone dabbling in occultism will eventually, like Napoleon Hill and many of his readers, embrace reincarnation. Shirley MacLaine is a good example, and her recent best-selling autobiography has convinced many readers. One cannot believe in both resurrection and reincarnation. The two are mutually contradictory. Jesus was resurrected, not reincarnated, and the difference between the two is both obvious and important. Reincarnation is based on the belief in the law of karma, which allegedly requires that subsequent lives be lived in order to pay in kind for the deeds done in prior lives. A husband who beats his wife in this life, for example, must return in a subsequent life as a wife who is beaten by her husband. Thus, karma cannot solve the problem of evil, but can only perpetuate it, for the person who commits a crime must become the victim of the same crime. This in turn requires that someone else commit the crime, who must then become a future victim ad infinitum. Going back in the other direction, the experiences of this life are a result of karma from a past life, which resulted from a yet prior life, and so on endlessly into the past. Where did it all begin? The Hindu speaks of the time when the three gunas, qualities, of the Godhead were in perfect balance and there was only the void. Something caused an imbalance in the Godhead, which began the prakriti, that is manifestation, and has been going on ever since. Thus everyone is reaping the bad karma that began in the Godhead and is built into the very fabric of the universe. In spite of the fact that this philosophy is absolutely hopeless, senseless, and immoral, many leading psychiatrists have become believers in reincarnation. This is because some of their patients, while being regressed into the past under hypnosis, have recited details from alleged prior lives, including all kinds of verifiable factual data that they could not have fabricated on their own. Psychiatrist Helen Wambach, for example, has regressed more than 5,000 patients into prior lives, and her careful analysis of their recorded memories is very convincing. We will deal with the deception involved in hypnotic trances and other forms of altered states of consciousness later. The importance of reincarnation in preparing the world to accept the Antichrist is clear. No would-be Christ could claim to be the biblical Messiah without the physical proof of the nail prints in his hands and feet and a spear wound in his side. However, if the world is not looking for the resurrected Jesus, but for the latest reincarnation of the Christ Spirit, then no nail prints or spear wound would be necessary. Antichrist can claim to be the Christ and be believed if he has sufficient psychic powers to seemingly work the miracles that are expected of Christ when he returns. This could well be how he proves who he is. Paul warned that Antichrist's coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. This puts in a very vulnerable position those Christians who accept anything that seems to be miraculous as coming from God. Although miracles are important, we must beware of placing greater emphasis upon them than Scripture supports. Jesus himself said of John the Baptist that there was no greater prophet born of women, Luke chapter 7, verse 28, and yet we are told that John did no miracle, John chapter 10, verse 41. And of Jesus it is said, though he did so many miracles, yet the Jews still did not believe on him, John chapter 12, verse 37. The Bible does not teach that the great need today is for a miracle ministry, as is so heavily emphasized on much Christian television. Rather, it warns us that we need discernment to know the difference between what is of God and what is of Satan. False miracles. Having rejected biblical miracles, today's science is accepting the false miracles of Satan, not for what they are, but as alleged natural powers of the mind, which we call psychic phenomena. It is through the new acceptance of psychic powers, PSI, that our generation is being prepared in the third way that Christ said spiritual deception would seduce those on earth in the last days. Science fiction has made superhuman powers believable, because so much presented by this genre has already become reality. Almost anything is believable now, not as a miracle from God, but as the result of tapping into some alleged universal force. Although there are still many skeptics, psychic research has come into its own in the past few years. A high percentage of not only ordinary people, but top scientists as well, are now convinced that human potential includes incredible powers of the mind such as precognition, telepathy, clairvoyance, and telekinesis. These powers are allegedly available to anyone who knows how to tap into the force through reaching the right state of consciousness. Though materialists, the Soviets are as deeply involved in psychic research as are the Americans. Of course, they try their best to maintain strictly materialistic explanations, such as designating telepathy biological radio, in spite of the fact that no brain waves can be detected emanating more than a few inches from the skull, whereas telepathy experiments have been successfully conducted over vast distances and even between Earth and orbiting cosmonauts. Numerous books have appeared documenting PSI research such as Frames of Meaning, The Social Construction of Extraordinary Science, Parapsychology and the Experimental Methods, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, and Brain, Mind, and Parapsychology, and many others. As Marilyn Ferguson has said, quote, historically, many great scientists have been drawn to PSI. Among the first officers of the Society for Psychical Research in Britain were 3 Nobel laureates: the discoverer of the electron, J.J. Thomson, the discoverer of argon, Lord Rayleigh, and Charles Richet. William James, usually described as the father of American psychology, co-founded the American Society for Psychical Research. Among the Nobel laureates specifically interested in psi were Alexis Carrel, Max Planck, the Curies, Schrödinger, Charles Sherrington, and Einstein. Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel physicist, co-authored a theory about synchronicity. Pierre Genet, a great French scientist of the 19th century, actively investigated PSI. Luther Burbank and Thomas Edison had a strong interest in the field." End of quote. There can be little doubt that our generation, as none before it in modern history, is beginning to be greatly influenced by the largely overlooked major sign that Jesus gave of the last days: religious deception involving false prophets, false Christs, and false miracles. In view of the many other signs converging in our day, it seems at least probable that the world is being set up for Antichrist as never before in its history. There is, however, yet more evidence that is even more intriguing and convincing.
Please visit our website, thebereancall.org, to access our radio archives going back to 1999 and our newsletter going back to 1986. We offer daily updates by email or visit us on Facebook or Twitter. Are you looking for information about a specific topic? Go to thebereancall.org and click on Topics at the top of the page. Our online store is thebereancall.com. We offer a wide variety of books, tracts, CDs, and DVDs. Note that most of our ebooks are free. I'm Gary Carmichael. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you can join us again next week. Until then, we encourage you to search the Scriptures 24/7.
Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back.